The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. The Inspector General testified that Peter Strzok led the investigation, both for the email investigation and the initial Russian investigation. Would you agree with his characterization of that?
Well, I wasn't there. I do think it's fair to say that Mr. Strzok played a lead role in both investigations. Exactly how it was structured and who supervised whom, that's probably subject to a little more context and explanation by others, but I don't think that's far off.
Fair enough. And then, so what's been characterized today is that that the finding of the Inspector General is that there was none of the bias that has brought Mr. Strzok into such, under a microscope so closely, affected the decisions made in the Hillary Rodham Clinton investigation. But that's a bit of a mischaracterization, because under questioning, and let's just go there. You probably have the book right there. If you go to page 211, I think it is. Let's see here. Nope. Page 149. What you'll find, and this is one thing the Inspector General testified as well, is that he did not find documentary or testimonial evidence that improper considerations, including political bias, directly affected the specific investigative decisions. But when we explored it, he admitted that those biases that Mr. Strzok had, and not just Mr. Strzok, but the others listed that I think have been referred for discipline, probably indirectly affected not only the information that decision makers had, but the decisions that were made. Would that be accurate? I know neither one of you were there, but do you think that might be accurate?
Well, Congressman, I think I'm going to let the Inspector General's report speak for itself. I don't
I'm talking about his testimony, not his...
Yeah, no, I wasn't here when he testified.
Yeah, it was. I didn't expect you to be watching, as riveting as it was. So, so that leads me to a series of questions related to what's going on here, and we move into the last investigation, the ongoing investigation. So I'll go to you, Mr. Rosenstein. The scope letter. Who wrote the scope letter for Mr. Mueller's, what the scope of his duties would be?
I don't know exactly who wrote it, but I'm responsible for it.
You signed off on it, probably.
Correct.
And have you turned an unredacted copy of that over to any congressional committee?
Not as far as I know.
Okay. And why is that?
Congressman, I really appreciate that question, because I understand why there's some confusion about this. And we only have 2 minutes and 7 seconds, but I wrote in my letter dated yesterday the history and the explanation of why it is wrong for the Department of Justice to publicly identify people who are subjects of investigation. So I certainly completely understand why you asked the question, but I hope that the letter will speak for itself in explaining why it is our policy not to do that. Now, people have deviated from that in the past, and my commitment is to follow the rules. That's a commitment I made to the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, when I took this job. And I recognize it's confusing because people have departed from the rules in the past. We're following the rules.
We're talking specifically the scope letter. So,
yes, sir.
So, okay, that's...
We do not identify persons, as is disclosed in the portion that's made public. We don't identify persons publicly unless they're charged, and we explain that in the letter.
Okay. So let's go into, I sent you a letter, and I don't know if you got it because it's just a couple days old, June 25th, asking if you were going to provide us with the names of everyone who has served past and present on Mr. Mueller's special counsel investigation, because as you might guess, we're kind of curious what vetting has gone in. The Inspector General found, at least in his testimony, that there was still probably one person still on that investigative team that he found to have untoward bias. And so are you inclined to release that, or is this something you and I need to talk about offline?
Yes, sir. When I took this job, I committed that I was going to read every letter personally.
Good luck.
Mr. Boyd pointed out that's not practical, so I haven't been able to do that. I completely understand that question. We'll review it. Obviously, our administration is very committed to backing the blue and protecting law enforcement officers from any kind of abuse or retaliation. I'd be reluctant to publicly name people who aren't on the front lines, just because of what that might invite, not by you, obviously, but by people who are ill-motivated. But I think you raised an important question. I have talked with Mr. Mueller on several occasions about the importance of making sure the people on his team.
Okay, I don't want to cut you off, but we'll get back to that maybe offline or something like that. But so I've got 10 seconds left. This is important. September 2nd, 2016, Lisa Page wrote a letter to Mr. Strzok saying that she had talking points for Director Comey because POTUS wants to know everything we're doing. Please identify POTUS and what do you think she meant when she said once.
I don't want to speculate on what Ms. Page meant. I do want to say, if I may, Congressman, I think it's important for you to understand that I completely understand the President's frustration with what's reflected in this report. I mean, nobody would be happy to know that people were sending those sort of text messages and they had those kind of views. And so I completely understand his frustration. My commitment is to make sure that everything that we do accords with the facts and the law, and we do not allow any bias to influence what happens on our watch.